"This isn't your bed," the billionaire CEO said, then her roommate started packing. Hello, everyone. Before we dive into today's powerful story of two women whose lives become intertwined by fate, heartbreak, and an unexpected chance at love, I have one small favor to ask. Please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another unforgettable story. It is completely free, only takes a second, and your support helps us continue creating emotional stories filled with healing, resilience, hope, and the beautiful journey of love between women. Every subscription, every like, and every comment encourages us to keep sharing stories that touch the heart. Now, I would love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Tell us your city or country in the comments below so our community can see how far these stories travel around the world. Thank you so much for being here. And now, let us return to the extraordinary moment when one simple sentence changed Claire Bennett's life forever. The strangest moments in life rarely begin with a grand announcement. Sometimes, they begin with a single sentence that makes no sense until it changes everything. I had spent the last 11 months convincing myself that starting over was supposed to feel empowering. Every self-help podcast said the same thing. Friends called it a fresh chapter. My therapist insisted healing wasn't a straight line. But no one warned me that beginning again mostly felt like carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs while wondering whether every decision that had brought me there had been a mistake. My name is Claire Bennett. I was 38 years old, recently divorced, unemployed for the first time since college, and trying very hard not to let anyone notice how frightened I really was. The apartment wasn't much to look at. An aging brick building tucked between a neighborhood bookstore and a family-owned bakery in downtown Chicago. The rent was somehow affordable, which should have been my first clue that life still had a few surprises waiting. The hardwood floors creaked with every step, the windows rattled whenever the elevated train passed a few blocks away, and the kitchen looked like it had survived at least 4 different decades without anyone agreeing on a remodeling plan. Yet the afternoon sunlight poured across the living room in soft golden stripes, and for the first time in months I allowed myself to believe I might actually build a peaceful life there. Megan Collins, the woman listed as my roommate, had seemed warm during our phone calls. She laughed easily, answered every question patiently, and even offered to let me move in a week early without charging extra rent because, as she put it, everyone deserved one lucky break after a hard season. I wanted desperately to believe people like Megan still existed. My entire life now fit inside 12 cardboard boxes, 2 suitcases, and 1 coffee mug my mother had given me years ago with the words "Begin Again" painted across the side. The irony wasn't lost on me. I placed the mug carefully on the kitchen counter before carrying my last box into what Megan had told me would be my bedroom. The room was small but comfortable, with white walls, a bookshelf built into one corner, and a neatly made queen-size bed beside a window overlooking maple trees that were just beginning to turn shades of amber. I smiled without realizing it. Maybe this place could become home. I had barely unfolded my favorite blue blanket when I heard the front door open. Confident footsteps echoed across the hardwood floor. They weren't hurried or uncertain. They belonged to someone accustomed to entering every room as though it already belonged to her. I stepped into the hallway expecting to finally meet Megan in person. Instead, I found myself looking at a woman who seemed entirely out of place in our modest apartment. She wore a perfectly tailored navy suit, her blonde hair pulled into an elegant knot, and there was a quiet authority in her blue eyes that made the hallway suddenly feel much smaller. She looked around once before her gaze settled on me. Then, without raising her voice or showing the slightest hint of emotion, she said, "That isn't your bed." For several seconds I simply stared at her, convinced she had walked into the wrong apartment. Before I could ask who she was or why she sounded so certain, another sound caught my attention. Behind me, Megan silently zipped the last suitcase she owned, lifted it from the floor, and without meeting my eyes, began packing the rest of her life. Megan finally looked at me, but the warmth I remembered from our phone conversations had disappeared, replaced by an expression that carried equal parts relief and regret. "Claire, I am so sorry," she said quietly, setting the suitcase beside the front door. "I should have explained everything before you got here." My eyes moved from Megan to the elegant stranger standing only a few feet away. Neither woman seemed angry. Neither appeared surprised. It was almost as if they had rehearsed this impossible conversation long before I arrived. "Someone needs to tell me what is happening," I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady even though my heart had begun racing. Megan nodded. "You rented this room honestly. I never lied to you about that. But I never expected Evelyn to come back today." The woman in the navy suit folded her hands calmly in front of her. "I rarely do unexpected things," she replied. Her voice was measured, confident, and somehow softer than I expected. "Today is an exception." Megan let out a nervous laugh that lasted less than a second. "Claire, this is Evelyn Carter." The name landed with the weight of a falling stone. Anyone living in Chicago knew who Evelyn Carter was. She had built one of the fastest-growing technology companies in the country, appeared on magazine covers, donated millions to education programs, and somehow maintained a reputation for being brilliant, demanding, and nearly impossible to read. I looked around the modest apartment again, convinced there had to be some misunderstanding. "You own this place?" I asked. Evelyn glanced toward the living room window where the afternoon light painted long shadows across the floor. "Technically, yes. But, why?" She smiled faintly, though sadness lingered behind her eyes. "Not every home worth keeping looks like a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan." Megan picked up another box and carried it toward the hallway. "I was only staying here temporarily while my condo was being renovated," she explained. "Evelyn let me use the apartment because she almost never comes here anymore." "Then why are you leaving?" I asked. Megan paused before answering. "Because my renovation finished last week." I frowned. "You could have told me." "I wanted to." She lowered her eyes. "But I knew if I mentioned Evelyn owned the apartment, you probably would not have accepted the room. Most people become uncomfortable the moment they hear her name." I wanted to deny it, but she was probably right. Living in a billionaire's property sounded less like renting a bedroom and more like accidentally stepping into someone else's story. Evelyn walked toward the kitchen, noticing the coffee mug I had unpacked only minutes earlier. She read the words begin again without touching it. Something in her expression shifted, almost too quickly to notice. "You have already unpacked," she observed. "Mostly," I admitted. Silence settled between us, broken only by the faint whistle of a passing train outside. Finally Evelyn turned back toward me. "You may stay." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "The room is yours if you still want it." I looked at Megan in confusion before facing Evelyn again. "I do not understand. If this apartment belongs to you, why would you let a complete stranger live here?" She considered the question longer than I expected. "Because empty homes become heavier every year they remain empty." There was something deeply personal hidden inside those words, something she had not intended to reveal. Before I could ask another question, Evelyn added one condition. "However, there is one room you must never enter." Her gaze drifted toward the closed door at the very end of the hallway. "No matter what you hear, no matter how curious you become, you must promise me you will never open that door." The promise I made that afternoon should have been simple to keep. Do not open one door. Most people could live their entire lives without feeling tempted by a closed room. I discovered very quickly that I was not most people. The first week settled into a quiet routine that almost convinced me the strange introduction had been nothing more than an awkward misunderstanding. Megan finished moving into her renovated condo, leaving me alone in the apartment. Evelyn disappeared each morning before sunrise and rarely returned before dark. I heard little more than the soft click of the front door and the distant hum of the espresso machine before she was gone again. We lived under the same roof like respectful strangers sharing borrowed time. My savings, however, were disappearing much faster than my confidence. Every morning I searched job listings while drinking coffee beside the living room window, sending resumes to companies that never seemed to answer. By Friday afternoon I had received 6 polite rejection emails and 1 automated response thanking me for my interest. I began wondering whether my career had quietly ended without anyone bothering to tell me. Late that evening I found Evelyn sitting alone at the kitchen table with nothing but a glass of sparkling water and an unopened container of takeout food. She was still wearing the same navy suit from earlier that day, although the sharp confidence everyone admired on television had faded into unmistakable exhaustion. Dark circles rested beneath her blue eyes. She looked less like one of America's most successful executives and more like someone who had forgotten what resting actually felt like. "Long day?" I asked carefully. She looked up, almost surprised to find another person in the apartment. "They usually are." I hesitated before opening one of the kitchen cabinets. "Would you mind if I made dinner? It feels like a shame to let good groceries sit untouched." She studied me for a moment before giving a small nod. "Only if you are making enough for yourself." 30 minutes later the apartment smelled of roasted chicken, rosemary potatoes, and fresh vegetables. It was not anything extraordinary, just the kind of meal my mother used to prepare on Sunday evenings, but something about sharing ordinary food made the expensive apartment feel unexpectedly warm. Evelyn took one bite before quietly saying, "I cannot remember the last time someone cooked for me without expecting something in return." I smiled gently. "Maybe they just wanted you to eat." She lowered her eyes toward her plate, and for the briefest moment I saw loneliness replacing authority. The next morning I received a phone call from a recruiting agency I barely remembered contacting. A temporary administrative position had unexpectedly become available. The location made me pause. Carter Innovations. I almost laughed. Life apparently enjoyed impossible coincidences. When I mentioned the offer during breakfast, Evelyn calmly set down her coffee mug. "If you accept, no one will know you live here." "I would rather earn the job than receive special treatment," I replied. A faint smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. "Good. Because I do not hire people who expect favors." Monday morning the company headquarters rose nearly 50 stories above downtown Chicago, its glass exterior reflecting the bright autumn sky. Employees moved through the lobby with remarkable purpose. Conversation stopped almost instantly when Evelyn stepped through the entrance. People greeted her politely, but an invisible distance surrounded her like a wall no one dared cross. During orientation I watched department managers become noticeably nervous whenever she entered a room. Yet every decision she made was thoughtful, every question precise, every criticism respectful rather than cruel. The intimidating billionaire from magazine covers was not unkind. She simply carried responsibilities heavier than anyone around her seemed able to imagine. As the workday ended, I found myself wondering which version of Evelyn Carter was real. The formidable leader who commanded an entire company with quiet confidence, or the lonely woman who sat alone each evening staring at untouched dinners in a nearly forgotten apartment. Somehow I had the growing feeling that the answer was waiting behind the one door she had forbidden me to open. I have always believed that curiosity wears a convincing disguise. It rarely announces itself as temptation. Instead, it whispers that understanding someone is an act of kindness. Nearly 3 weeks passed before that whisper became impossible to ignore. My temporary position at Carter Innovations quickly turned into the busiest part of my life. Every day I organized schedules, coordinated meetings, answered endless emails, and watched one remarkable pattern repeat itself. Everyone admired Evelyn Carter's intelligence, but almost no one truly knew her. Executives straightened their posture when she entered conference rooms. Investors laughed a little too quickly at her polite jokes. Assistants memorized her preferences as though preparing for an examination. Yet when the workday ended and the elevators emptied, she always walked to the parking garage alone. The distance between respect and friendship suddenly seemed much greater than I had ever imagined. At home our conversations gradually became easier. We discussed books, neighborhood restaurants, the changing colors of the maple trees outside our window, and whether Chicago winters were becoming colder or whether adulthood simply made them feel longer. Sometimes she smiled without realizing it. Sometimes I caught myself looking forward to hearing the front door open each evening. It surprised me how comfortable silence could become when shared with the right person. Then one rainy Thursday everything changed. I arrived home earlier than usual because the office closed ahead of an approaching storm. The apartment was unusually quiet. Evelyn had texted to say an investor meeting would keep her late. I made myself a cup of tea and settled onto the couch with a novel, but the steady rhythm of rain against the windows made concentration impossible. A sudden draft drifted through the hallway. I looked up and noticed the forbidden door was not completely closed. It had opened only an inch, perhaps pushed by the old building shifting in the wind. I stood frozen for several seconds. My promise echoed inside my mind. Do not enter. I should have walked away. Instead, I crossed the hallway and reached for the brass doorknob, intending only to close it. As my hand touched the cool metal, the door quietly swung open another few inches. The room beyond was nothing like I had imagined. There were no expensive paintings, confidential business files, or hidden luxuries. Soft afternoon light spilled through lace curtains onto a perfectly made bed covered with a white quilt. A small wooden rocking chair rested beside the window. Framed family photographs lined a bookshelf. One picture showed a younger Evelyn laughing beside an older couple whose smiles looked strikingly similar to hers. Another captured her holding the hand of a little girl with bright blonde curls and a gap-toothed grin that radiated pure happiness. A shelf displayed children's storybooks, carefully arranged as though someone expected them to be read again tomorrow. Beside the bed sat a pair of tiny rain boots, still spotless despite the passing years. Everything inside the room had been dusted with extraordinary care. Nothing appeared abandoned. It felt preserved, suspended in time by someone unwilling to let a single memory fade. My eyes settled on a leather journal resting atop the nightstand. It was closed, wrapped with a faded blue ribbon. I did not touch it. Somehow that felt far more personal than stepping into the room itself. My chest tightened with a sadness I could not fully explain. This room did not hide a secret fortune. It sheltered a love that had once filled every corner and a loss that still refused to leave. I quietly stepped backward, intending to close the door exactly as I had found it. Before I could reach the handle, I heard the unmistakable sound of a key turning in the apartment's front door, followed by measured footsteps stopping in the hallway just behind me. For one endless second neither of us spoke. I slowly turned around, already rehearsing an apology that I knew would never be good enough. Evelyn stood at the end of the hallway, still holding her umbrella, tiny drops of rain glistening on the shoulders of her charcoal coat. She looked from me to the partially open door and then back again. There was no anger in her expression. Somehow that made the silence even harder to bear. I was trying to close it, I said quietly. The door was open when I got home. The explanation sounded painfully inadequate the moment I heard it aloud. Evelyn remained still before taking a slow breath. Did you go inside? She asked. I could have lied. The answer might have protected both of us from an uncomfortable conversation. Instead I nodded. Yes. She closed her eyes for just a moment, as though steadying herself against a memory that had suddenly returned without warning. Did you read the journal? No. Did you touch anything? No. I only looked. Another long silence settled between us. Finally she stepped past me and gently closed the bedroom door until the latch clicked into place. Her fingertips rested against the wood for a moment before falling to her side. Thank you for leaving everything where it belongs, she whispered. Guilt settled heavily in my chest. I broke my promise. I am sorry. She surprised me by shaking her head. Curiosity is not the same as cruelty, Claire. Her voice remained calm, but it carried a weariness I had never heard before. I asked you to stay away because I was not ready, not because I wanted to punish you. We moved quietly into the kitchen. I started preparing tea without asking, grateful for something simple to do with my hands. The familiar sound of water heating and ceramic cups resting on the counter softened the uncomfortable silence. When I placed a warm mug in front of Evelyn, she wrapped both hands around it but did not drink. Instead she looked toward the rain streaking across the window. My parents raised me to believe that home was the one place where love should never disappear, she said softly. After they passed away, I kept telling myself I would eventually have a family of my own. I decorated that room because I believed the future was already waiting for me. She stopped speaking for several seconds. I did not interrupt. Some stories deserve the dignity of silence. Life had different plans, she continued. I could not bring myself to empty the room afterward. If I packed everything away, it would feel like admitting that hope itself had moved out. I felt my eyes sting. The room I had imagined was filled with mystery had actually been filled with unfinished dreams. I am truly sorry, I repeated. Not because I opened the door. Because I understand now why it mattered. Evelyn finally lifted her cup and took a small sip. For the first time since I had met her, she did not look like a celebrated executive or an intimidating billionaire. She looked like an ordinary woman carrying extraordinary grief. Do you know what surprises me most? She asked with a faint, almost uncertain smile. I shook my head. Most people spend their time asking me about my company, my investments, or my success. You apologized because you thought you had hurt my heart. I laughed softly through the emotion building in my throat. Some things are worth more than companies. She held my gaze for a long moment, and something quietly changed between us. The invisible wall that had separated landlord from tenant, employer from employee, stranger from stranger no longer felt quite so solid. Later that evening we shared homemade soup, talked about our favorite childhood books, and laughed over memories of learning to cook recipes that had gone spectacularly wrong. It was the first time I heard Evelyn laugh without restraint, and the sound transformed the apartment in a way expensive furniture never could. As I washed the dishes before bed, I realized the greatest mystery in that apartment had never been the locked room at the end of the hallway. It was how someone surrounded by admiration could have spent so many years believing she had to carry every sorrow alone. The following Monday began like every other, with coffee in a travel mug, the sharp autumn air brushing against my face, and the comforting belief that life was finally settling into something resembling peace. Looking back, I realized peace is often the quietest moment before everything changes. Carter Innovations felt different the instant I stepped through the revolving doors. Conversation stopped a fraction too quickly. People glanced at me before pretending they had not. 2 employees lowered their voices as I passed, but not before I caught my own name. At first I convinced myself I was imagining it. Temporary employees rarely became the center of office gossip. By 10 o'clock that illusion disappeared. My inbox filled with messages that should never have reached me. One contained a screenshot from an anonymous social media account. Another linked to an online business blog that thrived on rumors disguised as journalism. At the top of the article was a photograph of Evelyn and me leaving a neighborhood grocery store 2 nights earlier, each of us carrying reusable shopping bags and laughing about something I could no longer remember. The headline was impossible to ignore. It suggested that the company's billionaire chief executive had secretly moved a favored employee into her private residence and was giving her special treatment behind closed doors. Every ordinary moment had been twisted into something dishonest. The groceries became luxury gifts. Shared dinners became secret meetings. My temporary position became evidence of favoritism. By lunchtime the story had spread across financial news websites and social media feeds. I sat frozen at my desk, reading comments from strangers who knew nothing about either of us yet spoke with complete confidence. Some accused me of chasing wealth. Others questioned Evelyn's judgment. A few insisted they had always suspected she cared more about her personal life than the company she had built. None of it was true, yet truth suddenly seemed powerless against a story people wanted to believe. Shortly after noon my office phone rang. Evelyn's assistant asked me to come to the executive conference room. The walk there felt much longer than usual. When I entered, several members of the board were already seated around the polished walnut table. Their expressions were polite but painfully serious. Evelyn stood near the window overlooking the Chicago skyline, her posture as composed as ever, although I could see the exhaustion returning to her eyes. One board member cleared his throat before speaking. He explained that public perception mattered to investors. Until the rumors disappeared, they believed it would be wise for Evelyn to create visible distance between herself and me. The words were professional, carefully chosen, and completely devastating. Nobody accused either of us of wrongdoing. They simply feared appearances. I looked toward Evelyn, expecting her to agree for the sake of protecting the company. Instead, she answered with calm conviction. Claire earned her position through the same hiring process as everyone else. I will not allow false assumptions to define another person's character. The room fell silent. Her loyalty filled me with gratitude, but it also filled me with fear. I understood what she was risking. After the meeting ended, I remained alone in the empty conference room, staring at the skyline beyond the glass. I finally understood something I had refused to admit. As long as I stayed, every kind gesture Evelyn showed me would become another headline. Every shared meal would become another rumor. Every smile would carry another cost. That evening I returned to the apartment before Evelyn. I packed my clothes into the same cardboard boxes I had unpacked only weeks earlier. I wrapped my mother's coffee mug in a soft kitchen towel and placed it carefully inside the top box. Then I sat at the dining table with a blank sheet of paper, searching for words that could possibly explain why leaving the person who had helped me heal felt like the only way to protect the life she had spent years building. I finished the letter just as I heard Evelyn unlock the front door. For a moment I considered hiding the boxes, pretending nothing had changed, giving myself one more evening to postpone the inevitable. Instead, I remained seated at the dining table, my hands folded tightly around the envelope. Evelyn stepped inside, noticed the packed boxes immediately, and stopped without saying a word. The silence between us carried more weight than any argument ever could. She slowly removed her coat and placed her briefcase on the floor before walking toward me. "You are leaving," she said quietly. It was not a question. I nodded because I no longer trusted my voice. "The rumors are hurting your company," I finally managed to say. "Every day I stay here gives people another excuse to question your leadership." Evelyn looked at the boxes, then back at me. "People who choose gossip over truth will always find another story tomorrow." "Maybe," I replied, "but they should not be able to use me as today's story." I placed the envelope in front of her. "I cannot repay everything you have done for me, but I can stop making your life more difficult." She reached for the letter but did not open it. Instead, she asked the one question I had hoped she would never ask. "Is leaving what you truly want?" I lowered my eyes. "No." The single word felt heavier than everything else I had packed. Before either of us could speak again, the apartment door opened unexpectedly. Megan stepped inside carrying a small bakery box tied with red string. She smiled at first, clearly expecting an ordinary visit, but her expression disappeared the instant she saw the luggage stacked beside the wall. "What happened?" she asked. Neither of us answered. Megan looked from me to Evelyn, then noticed the unopened letter resting on the table. She sighed deeply, setting the bakery box aside. "I knew this day might come," she whispered. Evelyn frowned. "What are you talking about?" Megan pulled out a chair and slowly sat down. "It is time both of you knew the truth." The apartment became perfectly still. Rain tapped gently against the windows as though the city itself had stopped to listen. Megan folded her hands together before continuing. "Claire, when you answered my rental listing, it was not entirely by chance." I stared at her in confusion. "What do you mean?" She looked toward Evelyn with unmistakable affection. "She is my cousin." I blinked, unable to process what I had just heard. Megan nodded. "I never lied about needing a roommate. But I also knew Evelyn had spent years shutting herself away from everyone who cared about her. She worked, she donated to charities, she smiled for cameras, and then she came home to an empty apartment that had become more like a museum than a home." Evelyn's face softened with quiet disbelief. "You arranged this?" Megan nodded again. "Not because I wanted to manipulate either of you. Because I was running out of ideas. I watched the strongest woman I have ever known slowly stop living. Then I met Claire. She spoke about rebuilding her life after loss with honesty instead of bitterness. I thought maybe two people carrying different heartbreaks might help each other breathe again. I looked at Megan in astonishment. You chose me? No, she answered gently. I only opened a door. Everything that happened afterward belonged to the two of you. Tears shimmered in Evelyn's eyes, though she quickly brushed them away. For the first time since I had met her, I realized she was not the only person who had been quietly protecting everyone else. Megan stood and picked up her bakery box. I cannot decide what happens next, she said with a warm smile. But I do know one thing. Neither of you looked truly alive until you started sharing this apartment. Do not let strangers who know nothing about your hearts decide how your story ends. After Megan left, the apartment felt quieter than it ever had before, but it was no longer an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that arrives when the truth has finally been spoken aloud. Evelyn remained standing near the dining table, her fingers resting lightly on the unopened letter I had written. She looked at it for a long moment before sliding it gently back toward me. I do not want a goodbye letter, she said softly. I would rather hear your voice. I took a slow breath. Then you deserve complete honesty. She nodded. So do you. I met her eyes, feeling every carefully built wall inside me begin to fall away. I care about you more than I planned to. Somewhere between shared dinners, quiet mornings, and ordinary conversations, you became the person I looked forward to seeing every day. That is exactly why I cannot stay if my presence keeps costing you pieces of the life you worked so hard to build. Evelyn listened without interrupting. When I finished speaking, she walked to the living room window and looked out across the city lights beginning to glow against the evening sky. Do you know what everyone keeps misunderstanding? She asked. They think my company is the greatest achievement of my life. She smiled sadly. It never was. I waited quietly. Success gave me influence. It gave me opportunities to help people. I am grateful for that. But success never sat across the table asking how my day had been. It never laughed when I burned toast. It never reminded me that there could still be joy after disappointment. She turned toward me, her expression calmer than I had ever seen it. You did. My heart ached hearing those words, yet I shook my head. Then let me remain someone who helped you heal, not someone who becomes another burden. Evelyn slowly crossed the room until we stood only a few feet apart. Claire, listen carefully. If you stay because you feel obligated, I will ask you to leave. If you stay because you feel sorry for me, I will ask you to leave. But if you stay because this is where your heart wants to be, then no newspaper, no investor, and no stranger on the internet gets to decide otherwise. Tears blurred my vision. And your company? I whispered. She smiled with quiet confidence. Tomorrow morning I will meet with the board. I built Carter Innovations on integrity. If the people leading it cannot distinguish truth from gossip, then we have a much larger problem than public relations. The following morning she did exactly what she promised. Hours later she returned home carrying neither triumph nor frustration, only remarkable peace. She placed her keys on the kitchen counter and let out a slow breath. I offered to step down if the board believed protecting my reputation required sacrificing my integrity, she said. I stared at her in disbelief. You offered to resign? She nodded. I told them leadership without honesty is only performance. If remaining chief executive required pretending good people should be abandoned whenever rumors appear, then I was leading the wrong company. What happened? I asked. A warm smile spread across her face. No one accepted my resignation. Instead, they voted unanimously to release a public statement supporting both my leadership and the hiring process that brought you into the company. The rumors lost their power the moment we refused to let fear write our decisions. Relief washed over me so suddenly that I laughed through my tears. Evelyn laughed with me, and for the first time neither of us sounded like women recovering from heartbreak. We sounded like two people who had finally stopped allowing the past or the opinions of strangers to dictate the future they were brave enough to choose together. 1 year later I woke before sunrise to the familiar scent of fresh coffee drifting through the apartment and the quiet sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. There had been a time when this home echoed with silence so complete that every creak in the old hardwood floor sounded lonely. Now it carried the gentle rhythm of ordinary happiness, and I had learned that ordinary moments often become the most extraordinary memories. I walked into the kitchen to find Evelyn standing by the window wearing a comfortable sweater instead of one of her perfectly tailored business suits. She turned as I entered, smiling with the kind of ease that had once seemed impossible for her. "Good morning," she said, sliding my favorite coffee mug across the counter. The words "Begin Again" were still painted across its side, though years of washing had softened the lettering. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic and smiled back. "Good morning." Outside, golden autumn leaves drifted through the neighborhood just as they had on the afternoon I first arrived, carrying 12 cardboard boxes and more uncertainty than hope. So much had changed since then. Carter Innovations continued to thrive, not because of perfect headlines but because honesty had proven stronger than speculation. The company had introduced new employee wellness programs inspired by Evelyn's belief that people perform their best when they are treated as human beings before professionals. I had accepted a permanent leadership role within the organization, one I earned through months of hard work rather than unexpected opportunity. No one questioned that anymore. Respect had quietly replaced rumor. Later that morning Megan stopped by carrying cinnamon rolls from the same neighborhood bakery where she always claimed the frosting was worth every calorie. She laughed the moment she walked through the door. "This apartment finally sounds like people actually live here," she said. Evelyn looked around the room before answering with a grateful smile. "It finally feels like home." After breakfast she reached for my hand. "There is something I want to show you." We walked together toward the bedroom at the end of the hallway, the one that had once remained closed behind years of grief. She opened the door slowly. The room still held photographs of her parents, the rocking chair beside the window, and the little pair of rain boots she could never bring herself to throw away. But now fresh flowers rested on the windowsill, sunlight filled every corner, and the heavy sadness that had once lingered there had softened into peaceful remembrance. "I realized something," Evelyn said quietly. "Love does not disappear when life changes. It simply asks us to carry it differently." She placed a framed photograph beside the older family pictures. It showed the three of us smiling during a community literacy event our company had sponsored for local children. The new picture did not replace the old memories. It stood beside them. Past and present finally belonged in the same room. I felt tears fill my eyes as Evelyn gently squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for reminding me that healing does not mean forgetting." I leaned my head lightly against her shoulder. "And thank you for teaching me that beginning again is not something we do alone." As the afternoon sunlight stretched across the floor, I understood the lesson this journey had quietly written into both our lives. Wealth can build beautiful houses, but only kindness turns them into homes. Success can earn admiration, but only compassion earns trust. The deepest wounds do not heal because time passes. They heal because someone chooses to stay, to listen, and to believe that another person's heart is always worth understanding. Looking around that once lonely apartment, I realized the greatest gift either of us had ever received was not a second chance at love. It was the courage to open the door to hope again and discover that home had never been a place at all. Home had always been the person willing to walk beside you into every new beginning.